excited.
Okay,
So start, Jetty.
so my name is Jetty. I am from Belgium, but I did immigrated to the United States, so close to 11 years ago. So I'm an ordained priest, and also this is Martha, also an ordained priest. So
I'm Martha. My ears are still burning, whatever you heard.
I think it's fine.
Wendy.
Gary.
Holly.
And Leslie, I'm an ordained priest too.
That's good.
P.
Okay.
Dixon.
What we've been doing, Patricia, we've been studying some of the background to the Hebrew Bible, and I can send you the handouts from before. So what we are trying to do is to look at particular passages in each book of the Bible. We'll select a couple of passages and to explore them from the Jewish and the Christian perspective, because we feel that we lost a lot of our background, that as Christians, much of what was learned through the Jewish tradition has not been available to us as Christians. So that is why we're doing this, to take a little bit different take on the scriptures. And for the book of Genesis, I have basically selected two passages, and tonight we'll discuss one of them. If you don't have the handout, we're in the Genesis 3, chapter 3 is where we are. So has a version of that from the complete Jewish Bible, and we're relying on Jewish sources, particularly because they are the masters of the Hebrew and Aramaic languages, in which the Old Testament, as we call it, or the Hebrew Bible, was written. And as a result, I think they are able to pick up many more nuances to the passages than we get when we read them in English. It's just, we lose a lot from the English. I do have a couple of good Jewish translations that help a lot, and I've given you on this handout the entire section on chapter 3 from the complete Jewish Bible by David Stern. And then I have typed in selected verses from Robert Alter, who is my hero of all times in terms of his 5-volume translation of the Bible as a Hebrew scholar, but not aligned with any faith tradition. He was out of Berkeley, and he is world known and renowned for his very careful literary nuances that he gives to the scripture. And I was blessed on one occasion to hear him speak, but that's another story. But what I would like to do first is read this complete Jewish Bible translation out loud. Why don't we do this? We'll kind of go around. Wendy, could you read the first 4 verses?
Now the serpent was more crafty than any wild animal which Adonai, God, had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say you are not to eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman answered the serpent, "We may eat from the fruit of the trees of the garden. But about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden, God said, 'You are neither to eat from it nor touch it, or you will die.' The serpent said to the woman, 'It is not true that you will surely die, because God knows that on the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.'"
Okay, Gary, you pick up with verse 6 to 8.
When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it had a pleasing appearance, and that the tree was desirable for making one wise, she took some of its fruit and ate. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized that they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together to make themselves loincloths.
Tony, would you pick up with 8 through 10?
They heard the voice of Adonai, God, walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze. So the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of Adonai, God, among the trees in the garden. Adonai, God, called to the man, "Where are you?" He answered, "I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid myself."
Leslie, could you
Sure.
read,
He said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree from which I ordered you not to eat?" The man replied, "The woman you gave to be with me, she gave me fruit from the tree, and I ate." Adonai, God, said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" The woman answered, "The serpent tricked me, so I ate." Do you want me to go on?
yeah,
Adonai, God, said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, you are cursed more than all livestock and wild animals. You will crawl on your belly and eat dust as long as you live. I will put animosity between you and the woman, and between your descendant and her descendant. He will bruise your head, and you will bruise his heel."
okay, Jetty, can you pick up?
Can I ask a question before that?
Yeah.
I've always wondered this. If God is as omniscient as we believe him to be, why did he not know that Adam and Eve had picked the fruit? Or if he knew and he just wanted
Yeah,
Adam to explain it to him?
oh, yeah, yeah, here.
To the woman he said, "I will greatly increase your pain in childbirth. You will bring forth children in pain. Your desire will be toward your husband, but he will rule over you." To Adam he said, "Because you listened to what your wife said and ate from the tree about which I gave you the order, you are not to eat from it. The ground is cursed, and on your account, you will work hard to eat from it as long as you live. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat field plants. You will eat bread by the sweat of your forehead till you return to the ground. For you were taken out of it, you are dust, and you will return to dust. The man called his wife Hava, life, because she was the mother of all living.
Adonai, God, made some skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them. Adonai, God said, "See, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now to prevent his putting out his hand and taking also from the tree of life, eating and living forever, therefore Adonai, God, sent him out of the Garden of Eden to cultivate the ground from which he was taken. So he drove the man out, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden the kavim, and a flaming sword, which turned in every direction to guard the way to the tree. Now, I didn't, any comments thus far? Sounds pretty familiar to those people. There are some subtle differences in the translation, and I did not copy all of Robert Alford, but you'll notice if you look at the second column there were some things that I noted that I thought was important. If you look on page 4, here's what Alford says. To the woman he said, I will terribly sharpen your birth pains. In pain shall you bear children. And for your man shall be your longing, and he shall rule over you. And to the human he said, because you listen to the voice of your wife, and ate from the commanded you, you shall not eat from it. Cursed be the soil for your sake. With pangs shall you eat from it all the days of your life. Note here that the same word in Hebrew, the woman's birth pains and the pangs by which he shall eat are the same Hebrew word. And that really does not come through in English, in an English translation. It confirms the lot of painful labor of one sort or another to be shared by men and women. So it was interesting to me that it was the very same word. And then I want to emphasize a couple of things. At this point on page 5, where he says, by the sweat of your brow shall you eat bread till you return to the soil, for from there were you taken. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. In the Hebrew, the humus of the earth, the ground, the dirt, the soil, the stuff from which man was made, those are all one continuous kind of idea that man comes from humus, from earth, and that he will go back to earth. It is not, as in Christian tradition, often thought of as a punishment, or, you know, you good for nothing, you go back to the ground. That implication is not there in the Hebrew. It's more of this theme of humus, dirt, soil, earth, emphasizing man's fragility, that he comes from, he's earthy, he's earthbound. Some translations use the word earthling. Hi, Rebecca. Glad you're here. So anyway, that was interesting to me. That I think that as we've just gone into Lent, and most of us had ashes where we're told you are dust and you will return to dust. It was not viewed in the Hebrew as condemnation. It was simply a matter of fact. That's where we came from, and that's where we return. So then what is very interesting following that statement about returning to dust. And this I had never picked up before until I began to read Jewish sources, that it's not a condemnation. Look what happens in the verses right after. Eve is named for the first time, Hava, life. She is given a name, and what did we say about names in Scripture? It's a way of defining a person, giving that person an identity. She was the woman before this. Adam gives her, and he's not yet named either. He called his wife Hava, life, because she was the mother of all living. So that's not something that you would expect to occur if you're being told you're just a bunch of dust and you're no good. No, he is calling her by a name. He's giving her an identity. And then here's the next one that I really did not pick this up earlier. Verse 21, Adonai, God, made garments of skin for Adam and wife and clothed them. Now, if you go back to verse 7, in verse 7, they become aware that they're naked. So they sewed fig leaves together to make themselves loincloths. Well, that's a little bit protective, but then, and we don't hear the story of where the skin came from that the Lord used to clothe them. But if we assume it's animal skins, he has clothed them more protective than before. Eve is now named. She's the mother of all living, and God made garments for them and clothed them. So Jewish sources say he becomes more of a parent to them. They interpret this, or at least many of them do, as a journey on life where you are differentiating. You're going from childhood to adulthood. And it's as though God has moved on from this incident. She is named, and they are given warmth and protection. Then verse 23, Lord God sent him from the Garden of Eden to till the soil from which he had been taken. Is how altered or translated in the other Jewish, it's cultivate the ground from which he was taken. And then God drove the human out and set up east of the Garden of Eden the cherubim and the flame to guard the way to the tree of life. And so, what are some of the common ideas that we have been taught as Christians about this passage?
Well, I think in the Easter sequence, don't we sing, "Oh, happy fault"?
Oh, happy fall.
Yeah, like Christ wouldn't have come if Adam and Eve hadn't sinned, which is kind of problematic since Christ pre-existed, but yeah.
Yeah,
But I mean, I think especially as Catholics, we're taught about the shame. That's one of the things that is not mentioned in Jewish version. In the English version, it was, and they were ashamed. And here it's just that they recognized that they were naked. Now, of course, they covered up, but it's just because they had that knowledge.
Yeah.
Right,
So there's not a lot of shame in the recount of it. It's just that they,
exactly. In the Hebrew translation, where Eve looks at the fruit and sees that it is good, look and see in Hebrew overlaps with the word knowledge or to know. So she is becoming aware. She is already aware of right and wrong. She's been told what is right and wrong. And Jews look at this as a coming of age story, not so much a beginning of original sin, if you will,
but more maturing.
more of a maturing process, gaining of awareness,
growing consciousness.
of consciousness, exactly. So, and in that long handout I gave you, if you track through that handout, it's long, but look at the sections where Robert Alter goes through the book of
But you know,
Genesis.
here's the thing too, that Eve
What?
knew exactly in this particular time frame of their existence in the garden that God was really great. And she saw the perfection in the garden. And she believed that God told her, if you eat from that, you're going to be wise and whatever, and have a lot of knowledge. And that kept her going. And the Satan in Hebrew, knew exactly that he could trigger her on that. And so there was the point that the decision had to make what she wanted to do. And because she wanted to be like God, because she saw it was good in the perfection around her, she just eat. I don't see it as a curse, not at all. If she became the mother of the living, well, we are here, right?
Right. Right. She becomes the mother of the living, and right after God tells them their ultimate fate will be to go back to ghosts.
And so he didn't abandon them because dust from dust and you go back. So it's God who picks up from the earth, the red earth, like we call Adam also earthling, coming from there. So they go back and they know you go back to God. And so the Hebrews understand it more what it really means.
They do. God made garments, and the Lord knew that they had gained understanding of right and wrong, and he drove them out because he was afraid they aspired to be God. It wasn't the knowledge that they sought that was wrong. It was the aspiring to know everything. You already know enough. You know what is good and what is bad.
Just very often. What's kind of for a man? That sounds as if God's afraid of the competition.
But now,
That God is afraid of a
Sounds
competition.
like God is afraid of the competition.
that's, I think, how some people have read it.
Sure.
I think they have, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure that that's right, because he then clothes them and basically sets them up that says, here's the line. Because this next step you would be aspiring to be God. it's okay to know right and wrong. It's okay to have wisdom. It's better to know how to use it. And you're not going to cross that line. And when we get into Genesis 11, which is on the Tower of Babel story, we'll see that thing too. But here are some things. I went to an Old Testament Christian scholar who is an expert on Hebrew and relied quite a bit on him because I think Walter Brueggemann has called us on our track as Christians in his writings that we have misinterpreted some things out of the Jewish tradition. And that was part of what our goal is here, to understand what they did with it, and also to look at our own misinterpretations. So I quoted a long section from two of his books here in column 3. And he says in the Old Testament, sin is profoundly God-centered. And its premise is that we are creatures. We were made by God to live in responsiveness to God. And sin is a distortion or a violation of that order of creatures where we refuse to be dependent and refuse to be responsive to God's call. In other words, we think we can do it all by ourselves. We've heard that said in church many times. But Berghe thinks that the Jewish concept of sin is one that is due to violating that proper order and realizing our own dependence on God. And he says the Old Testament is clear that sin is not an inescapable product of creatureliness, a characteristic creatureliness, and sin in Christian interpretation of the Old Testament is reflected in the Ash Wednesday formula. Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Dust acknowledges creatureliness, finiteness, but that formula is often taken to mean you are a sinner. And it doesn't mean that at all. In Christian interpretation, the fall is where human creation has fallen helplessly and irreversibly into the power and habits of sin, so that we are irreversibly alienated from God and helpless to alter that condition. And what Brueggemann says is that understanding of fall is what was used to develop this idea of original sin, which was very strong in Catholicism through the Middle Ages and even later in their doctrinal formulations in more recent times. They seem to have backpedaled a little bit on this business about original sin, and that if a baby dies without being baptized, that child is going to hell, that mark of original sin condemns them. They backed off from that stuff, which is good.
Don't you think though that as a whole, the way Christians have interpreted the Bible is very legalistic? I mean, not just Genesis, but as a whole, everything is about right or wrong and how we're always wrong. That's part of the problem I have with especially evangelical Christians.
Yes.
You are always in the wrong. You are always a sinner. And I don't think that that's what God intended for us to get out of this. I think what he intended for us to get out of this is I love you as my creation.
Exactly.
But we've heard it interpreted, I think, by some crazy lawyer somewhere. Because they're all about right and wrong.
It's been overemphasized according to Berghe.
Yeah.
He says, the understanding of the fall of humanity into the power of sin, a fall that prepares the way for the good news of the gospel, is rooted in the interpretive authority of Paul in Romans and 1 Corinthians. Paul is parallel in a recognition of the sorry state of helpless humanity in the near contemporary Jewish apocalyptic literature. If you look at 4 Ezra, and I intended to quote that, but I walked off out the book. But basically, it is very similar to this version that we've been taught in the very early Jewish. You can find that idea there too, but they seem to have abandoned that, and we went on with it and made it a major faith. He says the more characteristic view of the Old Testament regarding human sin and human capacity for obedience is expressed in Deuteronomy 30. And I love this verse. I really love this. Surely, this commandment is not too hard for you. Is it too far away? No, the word is very near to you. It is in your mouth and in your heart for you to observe. So does that sound like a right, wrong, bad, good? Does that sound like it's being jammed down our throats about how horrible we are?
No, it sounds like the primacy of conscience.
Yeah, exactly. So Berghe goes on to say, and he ties it together for us, the dominant trajectory of interpretation around this question of sin is very different in Judaism and in Christianity. It is not the case that either interpretive trajectory can be said to be wrong. The dominant Christian interpretation has entailed an immense act of imagination, exposition beyond the narrative itself that makes no such universal claim about original sin. There are now probes among Christian scholars suggesting that the decisive interpretation of Paul by Augustine and Luther misconstrued Paul's intention. It is clear that interpretation is not finished, but is an endless, open-ended project for those who take the text seriously. The notion of original sin, that is, sin in principle, we're all plastered with sin from the moment we're conceived. In other words, this reading emerged in early Judaism and further developed in a Christian theological trajectory that runs from Paul to Augustine to Luther. But a careful interpretation of Genesis 3 does not yield such an ominous reading. And nowhere in the Old Testament itself is such a notion of elemental, underlying sinfulness normative for all of us, that's normal. That's our normal state, is that we were stamped with sin from the beginning of our lives. And I love what Berghe says. Such a reading is a belated caricature of the Old Testament, made through the development of Christian self-interpretation. And he says two unfortunate outcomes come from that over-reading of it, that much of Western Christianity, sinfulness and guilt theologically dominate self-understanding. In other words, there's not going to be self-understanding unless you grovel in the sin first. I'm overstating too, that your self-understanding will be incomplete if you don't really dig and realize mea culpa, mea culpa, mea culpa. And that has been self-awareness or self-understanding entails much more than recognizing where we've gone wrong. The Jewish tradition doesn't underrate it or undermine it or minimize it, but they put it in a context that self-understanding, that the relationship between God and us, that relational level is where we will understand sin. We will not understand it outside of that relationship with God. If we sit here and say, I'm going to go to confession, let's see, in my lifetime, I committed adultery 3 times, I stole 10 times, I swore at my neighbor 100 times, or whatever. That's not going to get it. That it's our understanding between you and God, and where you put yourself in competition with God. Maybe God did say that it was competitive. We put ourselves in competition with God, not just to know and to be wise, but to think we know everything when we do not know everything. And that's kind of the line that the Lord drew in the Garden of Eden. And he says the second thing that this thing about original sin has resulted in Western Christianity is a Christian stereotype of Jews as legalists.
Which kind of,
And that has been imposed on the text.
that kind of tickles me because it's exactly the opposite. It's the Western theology that has made this look legalistic.
When we interpret through that theological lens, there are so many nuances that we miss out on. I'm just beginning to realize, like after being told that they'll go back to dust, Eve is named, she comes into more of a self-definition, if you will, a more mature position. And God, in his mercy, clothes them more protection and warmth and being a parent in a sense. So I had never really put that together before. So we have in our Christian tradition, the way we have been taught about these scriptures, we have been given an overemphasis of certain things that I think our Jewish friends can give us some correction for. And Berghe says, Testament takes the gracious self-giving of God more seriously and assigns it a more decisive importance. So when you leave that chapter 3, you go into where the children of Adam and Eve come to be, and there's this big battle of right and wrong that rears its head again. But sticking with the story we have here, I think it helps to know a little bit more about the Jewish reading of some of those things that I found, if I can find my dog-eared notes. More about what Eve saw and looked at and knew when she looked at the fruit. That other big handout says we live in the mystery of life. Of course, we cannot know everything, but there is a crucial difference between knowing everything and knowing something. The limits of our ability to know are unknown. If we too easily settle for the current inventory of knowledge, we might run the risk of intellectual irresponsibility. We might say that Eve lusted for knowledge as she gazed on the forbidden fruit. In fact, she had no choice. If she was going to be there for Adam, what God is for Adam, a faithful, living, giving companion. And there's a phrase in Hebrew again, Ezer, which they use the same phrase in talking about God's relationship to Adam and Adam and Eve's relationship with one another. They use that term. If you're going to be there for another, then you have to ask the questions. And so the Jewish tradition tends not to make her the bad one that is seen in Christian belief. The JPS Jewish Press, JPS Jewish Publishing Society Torah commentary says, the woman is not a temptress. She does not say a word, but simply hands her husband the fruit, which he accepts and eats. The absence of any hint of resistance or even hesitation on his part is strange. It should be noted, however, that in speaking to the woman, the serpent consistently uses a Hebrew plural form. This suggests that the man was all the time within earshot of the conversation and was equally seduced. In fact, the Hebrew text here literally means she also gave to her husband with her. suggesting that he was a full participant in the sin.
Some translations says that he was standing next to her.
Yeah, they do. You know, and that comes from the Hebrew.
So why didn't he say anything?
Hmm? Yeah.
Why didn't Adam say anything? I mean, just be, maybe that's ridiculous what I'm saying, but why didn't he stop her? I mean, no one will ever get
Today's
it.
husband would say, put their cat in the home.
That's a valid question. Why didn't
Why
he?
did that never happen, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Something like you heard what God said, don't do that.
They also say only the serpent is cursed. The man and the woman seem to suffer the consequences of what constitutes the reality of life. Verse 15 implies more than the serpent's ultimate defeat. And then they talk about what the word curse means. It really has multiple meanings. And it can mean this is what will normally happen because. It implies, in some sense, a natural consequence. So it's not that you're going to be made to have a lot of pain and pangs of hunger and pangs of childbirth. That is a natural part of being a human being. So, and the snake is not an anti-God symbol, according to some of the interpreters. Let's see, let me pick up real quickly here. What has been created out of the curses and blessings is what currently exists. It's not like a damnation for all time, or that it applies to everything you ever do, which you have to go there if you buy the concept of original sin. Humans struggle against nature and one another. To declare that Eve is life giver in the aftermath of what has been labeled the first sin is odd. Our lives have never been like paradise, but have always involved choices, danger, and the necessity to discern what is right and wrong. In his explanation, that Eve did what he would do, what he would not do, they are better off. Life with all its curses and blessings can now begin in earnest. There's more I could go into here, but if you scan that long handout I sent you, you'll get the things that we didn't have
you know,
time.
it's so personal, all this. It's really, you know, it's for each one, it's different how you realize what life really is. And because of the blessing after that day, some call a curse, I don't see it as a curse.
Yeah,
It became a very big blessing.
and they talk about curse in multiple ways, that it can just mean consequences of being on earth as a body.
Well, it seems to me, and I hope this doesn't make me cynical, but if Adam and Eve had not failed the test of not taking, where would we be? They'd still be up there cavorting around the Garden of Eden, and we'd be nowhere.
Well,
They'd have to be.
that is a Jewish traditional concept that she did what had to be done. You had to test the limits, as it were. We talk about children having to test the limits. At that point, humanity were a pair of babes They hadn't grown up. They finally figured out they ought to leave some plants and cover their butts, but they were not really at a point of awareness of being adults yet. And that it was, in one way of interpreting this, it was a necessary step, not one that damned us to hell forever.
And it brought us to life.
Yeah,
And so then giving birth to her first two sons, Cain or Cain in Hebrew and Abel, the two choices again,
yeah, yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And so the good guy dies.
yeah.
The bad guy's got a mark on his forehead, and everyone will see what will happen with him. And then 7 times the curse will go over the person,
Right.
if he would be killed. Wow, man. Leslie.
Do you have any words of wisdom?
So the existing of our now, the world it's about all our choices.
It is what it is, as
Well,
they
That's
say.
what it's all about.
And we, just like Adam and Eve, we make choices based on our experiences.
Yes.
The more we mature, the better our decisions
Exactly.
hopefully become.
Yeah.
But I mean, I see it as a continuing theme throughout the Bible, that these people are presented to us as immature in their faith or immature in their life. And through God,
They make better choices.
Yeah. and I know that had I read Genesis with the Christian thought of, we're all evil and we got to work to be good, I would not be a Christian today. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't go for that.
Well, we all were sold to build goods one level or another,
Yeah.
depending on what churches or situations we came from. And it is helpful to see how the Jews have had a couple of extra 1,000 years to look at these passages that we have largely ignored.
But it's to know, in a sense, that original sin and we are bad
No,
is not written in stone.
no.
Just because that's somebody else.
The other thing is, it's not the gospel according to Paul. Paul is not gospel. He's Paul with his limitations. And it's like he takes 2 steps forward, 1 step back all the time. Even for Romans, it's like that. He goes forward, he goes back, he goes forward, he goes back. So to take him as the authority on original sin, I think, is unfair to him.
Well, didn't this say that Paul was misinterpreted as well?
Yeah.
Somebody else.
That misinterpreted some, but then Augustine took a hold of it and ran with the whole original sin thing.
Yeah.
That has
But
been.
he was a bad person. So maybe he was, wasn't he?
Augustine was not,
He was not pure.
He had all these hiccups from sex, so he had to do something to.
well, and then also more theology about men and also women, it was really bad.
All of us have to suffer
Because of
the
him.
healthy spring around, okay?
Yeah.
So we're at the end of our time.
Let me see, no.
Did you have something to say, Rebecca?
I don't want to say Rebecca's like Fred Astaire dancing on the ceiling. He's been spinning.
Sorry, what?
What do the Mormons do with original sin? Do they believe it, Rebecca?
Mormons do this whole song and dance about Eve was given 2 commandments that she couldn't keep at the same time. One was to multiply and replenish the earth, and the other was don't eat the fruit. And they do this whole thing about transgression versus sin, and that she transgressed the law and she didn't sin. So there's that, which is problematic because then you have God telling you to do things that you can't do, which kind of makes him a trickster God, in my opinion. So they don't bash on Eve as much as everybody else does. On the other hand, women are still second-class citizens anyway, even though it wasn't all Eve's fault. As far as original sin, they don't talk about it all that much, but boy, you better work your ass off if you want to get saved.
Okay. Well, I'm not laughing at them, I'm laughing in my struggle to grasp all this. Because it is useful to understand
Yeah.
how other traditions have interpreted these things. And so we have our expert Mormon representative here. And Mother Leslie, do you have any other words of wisdom? Leslie is our other priest here, Patricia. So, and she's the most learned of the 3 of us.
Oh, no, that is not true. No, I don't. This is exciting stuff.
Yeah. And
I
it-
think
That you intuit, but I'd never fully fleshed out the thoughts before.
right. And the only bad thing about this was where we said we would try to cover the entire Bible in a year or maybe more. If we do that, we're only going to end up spending a couple of sessions on each book. And there's so much more, but I'm going to try to take representative, important pieces. You know, they don't like, there's no way we will cover the whole book of Genesis.
No, but you understand.
If you can before next week, read Genesis 11. It's the story of the Tower of Babel.
Mm-hmm.
I still am working on my handout for it, so I'm sorry I don't have those ready to go. You're getting it as I'm able to produce it. But Patricia will send you.
And I will
a
send
batch of
everything
stuff.
out.
Thank you.
You already have 2 emails, Patricia.
Okay, thank you.
The rest I'll do tomorrow.
We're so glad you came.
Thank you.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Really nice to meet you.
Oh, all of you too. It was very interesting concept. I guess I never thought of that, you know, that if Adam was there, why didn't he tell Eve, I don't want to eat the fruit? You know, and then you understand that, you know, all of our actions have consequences, you know, whether we realize that or not. And I think that's what that's showing us, that if, you know, we need to think about what we do before we do actions.
Exactly.
Well, plus this is a really good example of a consequence is not a punishment. A consequence is just a result.
Right.
It's
Well,
not.
the idea of differentiation in like the Jungian sense is so it's a necessary
Mhm.
thing to do. It's required. It's like the terrible twos. You're supposed to disattach from your maker, from your mother.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Well, I really have enjoyed this time.
Yeah.
Yeti, shall we do the prayer again?
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me explain to Patricia, the room we're in, we have the 4 archangels on the walls in the ceiling. And we're very fond of some Jewish prayers, and we use them quite a bit, Yeti and I. So Yeti, come over here with me and help us do this prayer.
It's very short, so we are going to the first angel is the angel Gabriel. So in the name of Adonai, the God of Israel, may the angel
Gabriel,
Michael
Michael,
be on the right, and the angel Gabriel be on the left. And in front of us, the angel Uriel,
behind us, over the
power and Shekinah, divine presence. Amen. And the
Amen.
Shekinah is a representative of the Holy Spirit. So,
Love you
and
guys.
it's an evening prayer. If you want to have that prayer, I will send it to you. You can pray it every evening. It's a prayer just before you go to bed to be safe.
Oh, thank you.
Okay?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Amen.
Very good.
Great class.
Awesome. Be
Good
back
to
next
see you.
week.
Rebecca, love to see you on the screen.
Yeah, it's nice to see you.
Love you, Berghe. Does she have her sound? Can you hear
Okay,
us, Rebecca?
Close up now.
Yes.
See you all next week. Any question, just ask him and send it to me, okay?
Thank you. Have a good evening.